Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you're watching from today. I'd love to know. And if you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to like and subscribe. All right, let's jump in. Catherine Morgan sat across from General Richard Boyd in the cold meeting room at the Turan Coalition headquarters, the harsh lights overhead making the folders on the table between them look even more official. Her fingers lightly grazed the edge of the folder he had just slid toward her, the faintest hint of unease hidden behind her professional demeanor. The general's voice cut through the tension in the room as he spoke, his tone serious, but with an undercurrent of concern that Catherine had learned to recognize in those who were accustomed to life and death decisions. "This is not a request we make lightly, Miss Morgan," General Boyd began, his gray eyebrows furrowing deeply. "The Drarian Empire has agreed to peace talks, but we believe it's a trap." Catherine's gaze flicked to the image inside the folder, her eyes narrowing slightly at the sight of King Zardeth. The alien ruler's blue skin shimmered like metal under the light, his 6 fingers tapping impatiently on his throne, his eyes changing color from red to purple, locking onto the camera with an expression of clear disdain. He didn't need to speak for Catherine to know the hate he held for humans. She could see it written in every line of his face. A king who saw power and strength, and power alone. "He hates humans," General Boyd added, his voice softening. "But we need this treaty. Earth and our colonies can't survive another war right now." Catherine nodded, the weight of his words settling in her chest. She had lived through wars, countless conflicts, some of which she had personally witnessed in the dark corners of history that humanity had long since forgotten. Now, another war loomed over Earth's horizon, and the general's plea carried more than just the fate of her planet. It was a call for survival, for diplomacy to hold its ground against an empire that thrived on domination. "You want me to negotiate with someone who wants to kill me?" She said it flatly, without a hint of fear or disbelief. It wasn't a question, more a statement of fact. General Boyd didn't flinch at her words. He knew what he was asking. "We're sending protection, of course. Captain Wells and Lieutenant Rodriguez will accompany you. They're the best we've got." Catherine allowed herself a slight smile. It wasn't a cruel smile, but a knowing one. She had faced many threats over her long years. Alien, human, and everything in between. And while she appreciated the gesture, she knew that the protection they offered wouldn't change the outcome if it came to a confrontation. Her eyes lingered on the photograph of King Zardeth for a moment longer. Then she closed the folder and placed it gently back on the table. "I'm sure they are," she replied quietly. Later that night, in the privacy of her small apartment, Catherine moved around the room with a practiced grace, packing her diplomatic uniforms, carefully folding them before placing them in her bag. She worked methodically, but with an air of anticipation that made the whole process feel like a ritual rather than just a task. Her fingers brushed over each item she packed, the familiar weight of it all reassuring her. But this mission wasn't just about the clothes she wore or the diplomatic papers she carried. There were other things, hidden away in the shadows of her life. When she was sure the apartment was empty, Catherine approached a worn wooden box that sat in the back of her closet, hidden from view. It was old, like everything else in her life, and it smelled faintly of dried herbs and something older, something timeless. She opened it slowly, revealing a collection of odd trinkets: bones, fried herbs, small cloth dolls, and a single chicken feather. Each object had its purpose, its power. She selected a few items, tucking them into the secret pockets of her luggage. They would remain unseen by the world she was about to step into, but they would be ready if the need arose. Catherine moved to the kitchen window and opened it wide. She stood there for a moment, gazing out at the city below, letting the cool air fill her lungs. Then, without warning, she whistled, a sound so unnatural that it seemed to slice through the night like a forgotten memory. The tune was old, older than any language spoken by humankind, older than the cities that spread out beneath her. Within seconds, a large black crow landed on the windowsill, its beady eyes studying her with the same quiet intensity as the alien king's. "Tell the sisters I go to the stars again," Catherine whispered, her voice low and ancient, the words slipping from her mouth as if they belonged to another time, another place. "If I do not return, the forest must be moved." The crow gave a single, sharp caw before flying off into the darkness, disappearing as silently as it had arrived. Catherine watched it go, her eyes narrowing slightly. When she turned back to the mirror in her hallway, she caught a glimpse of something, no, someone else in the reflection. The face staring back at her was not that of a diplomat. It was the face of an ancient woman, her wild white hair untamed, her teeth sharp as needles, her eyes burning with the power of ages. "King Zardith," she murmured to herself, her voice carrying an edge of amusement. "Another king who thinks he knows what power is." With a final glance at her reflection, Catherine straightened her shoulders, pushing the image of the witch aside. She had work to do, and the universe would soon learn that Catherine Morgan was far more than just a diplomat. The next morning, Catherine arrived at the spaceport, her black luggage in tow. The sleek diplomatic vessel, the U.S. Horizon, waited on the landing pad, its polished hull gleaming in the morning sun. Captain Alan Wells met her at the entrance ramp, his tall frame casting a long shadow over her as he saluted with military precision. "Ms. Morgan," he greeted her, his voice respectful but firm. "We're honored to serve as your security detail." Lieutenant Susan Rodriguez stood beside him, her hand resting on the sidearm that hung from her belt. "All security protocols are in place, ma'am. We'll protect you with our lives." Catherine nodded, a faint smile tugging at the corners of her lips. She had seen men like Captain Wells before, serious, professional, and willing to put themselves in harm's way for a cause they believed in. But Catherine knew the truth. No amount of protection would save them if things went wrong. She needed no one but herself for this mission. Still, she played her part, offering a pleasant smile. "Let's hope that won't be necessary, Lieutenant," she replied. As they boarded the ship, Catherine felt the hum of anticipation settle in her bones. She glanced back once at Earth, watching as the planet grew smaller beneath them. The years had passed, and Catherine had seen it all. Wars, empires rising and falling, civilizations crumbling beneath their own weight. Earth was just one in a long line of worlds, and soon it would either be claimed by the Drarian Empire or protected through negotiation. The stakes had never been higher, and yet, as Catherine leaned back in her seat, watching the stars beyond the viewport, she couldn't help but whisper to herself, "They will learn. They will learn what true power is." The U.S. Horizon passed through the final jump gate with a flash of brilliant blue light, the transition between worlds a seamless blur. As the ship emerged into the vast expanse of space, the planet Tracker Prime came into view, its surface a striking mixture of purple and green shimmering beneath the red soil. Catherine stood at the main viewport, her gaze fixed on the planet below. The Drarian Empire had made their home here. An empire that seemed so vibrant and full of life, yet so dangerous. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Captain Wells said, his deep voice pulling Catherine from her thoughts. He stood beside her now, eyes fixed on the planet as well. Hard to believe something so pretty could be home to the most dangerous empire in the galaxy. Catherine didn't answer immediately. She was not interested in the beauty of the planet, though she could appreciate it from a distance. What she saw, what she felt, was far more dangerous than what appeared before her. She narrowed her eyes, her senses picking up the tension in the air, the whisper of old magic on the edge of perception, the barely detectable hum of energy surrounding the planet. Each one of those ships could destroy an Earth city in seconds, Catherine said softly, her voice laced with quiet warning. Captain Wells glanced at her, and she could see the realization begin to settle in. He'd always known Earth was vulnerable in space, but to see the true scope of that vulnerability was a shock. He nodded but said nothing, perhaps understanding, or perhaps choosing not to dwell on the looming threat. "Beauty often hides danger, Captain," Catherine added, her words heavy with experience. "In my lifetime, I've learned that the prettiest flowers sometimes carry the deadliest poison." Just as she spoke, a cold voice interrupted their quiet contemplation. "Terran vessel, you are cleared to dock at Imperial Port 7. Deviate from your assigned path, and you will be destroyed." Lieutenant Rodriguez, who had been standing silently behind them, leaned forward, adjusting her uniform. "Friendly bunch, aren't they?" she muttered under her breath. Catherine didn't respond. Her mind was already focused on the task at hand, anticipating the negotiations ahead. The ship began its descent through the clouds of Tracker Prime, the strange energy that emanated from them, illuminating the sky in hues Catherine had never seen before. Colors that shifted and swirled as if alive with intent. The spaceport, when they arrived, was massive. A sprawling structure made of both crystal and metal, the surface gleaming under the alien sun. Hundreds of Drarian ships were docked in perfect rows, each one more advanced than anything Earth had ever dreamed of. As they made their way toward the landing pad, Catherine felt the weight of being a stranger on this world, an outsider on the edge of an empire whose power was beyond anything she had faced before. Still, there was a calmness within her. She knew the role she had to play. Royal guards met them at the landing ramp. The guards stood tall, their blue skin covered in intricate armor that hummed with energy, shifting color with every step they took. Their eyes, those shifting eyes, studied the humans as they approached, assessing them with an intensity that made Catherine's skin crawl. She didn't flinch under their gaze. She was used to being watched, but these eyes were different, alien, filled with an energy that made her senses tingle. "The Earth diplomat will come with us," the leader of the guards said, his voice translated through the ear devices they wore. The words echoed in Catherine's mind, distant but clear. "The Galactic King awaits." Catherine nodded once, then turned to Wells and Rodriguez. "Stay close," she said, her voice calm, but carrying an underlying weight. "I'll need you both close. But remember, don't get in the way." They followed the guards through the streets of Tracker Prime's capital. The city stretched far and wide, with buildings so tall they seemed to scrape the very edges of the sky. Some of the structures defied gravity, floating above the ground, detached from the main body of the city, their bases shimmering with unknown technology. Catherine couldn't help but marvel at the alien ingenuity. She had seen similar technology before, on other worlds, in forgotten ruins, but nothing like this. It was all so alive. Every corner she turned, every street they passed, felt like a different world entirely. This technology is at least a century ahead of ours, Lieutenant Rodriguez whispered as they moved. The awe in her voice was unmistakable, but Catherine could hear the unease buried beneath it. How do we stand a chance against this? Catherine smiled slightly, but it wasn't an answer that would bring comfort. Technology is young, she said, her voice smooth and steady. There are older powers, Lieutenant. The royal palace loomed ahead, its grandeur overwhelming even the imposing structures surrounding it. It seemed almost to pulse with life, the crystal walls shifting colors as they approached, the entire palace seeming to breathe in rhythm with the city. Catherine felt the subtle pull of something ancient, something buried deep beneath the surface. There was more here than just technology. There was magic, buried in the very heart of this planet. The platform they were on slowed as they neared the entrance, guarded by creatures that at first glance appeared to be stone statues. But as they moved, their forms shifted, skin rippling, muscles tightening, until they were as real as any living creature. Catherine's eyes flicked toward them, her expression unreadable, but she could feel the weight of their gaze. These were no ordinary guards. These were beings meant to keep something much more dangerous than a mere diplomat from crossing their path. Inside the palace was even more magnificent than Catherine could have imagined. Halls stretched for miles, disappearing into the darkness above. Strange plants grew from the walls, their petals glowing softly in the dim light. The air was thick with the scent of alien flowers, and creatures of all shapes and sizes moved about on various tasks, their presence a reminder that this palace was alive, not just a structure, but an entire ecosystem in itself. Catherine noted all of it, the beauty, the power, the sophistication. But beneath it all, something darker whispered to her, something that made her skin crawl in ways she could not ignore. The throne room doors were made from a metal Catherine had never seen before. The sound of them opening was eerily silent, and Catherine stepped inside with the air of someone who had been here before. She had, in a sense. Many times she had faced rulers and kings of various species, of various worlds, but this was different. There was an ancientness here that could not be ignored. King Zardith sat on a throne that floated several feet above the ground, his six-fingered hands tapping impatiently against the armrests. The Drarian king's eyes shifted from red to purple as they met Catherine's, the intensity of his gaze sending a ripple of tension through the room. He looked down at her with clear disdain. "The human diplomat approaches," a thin alien with gray skin announced, his voice cold and unfeeling. Catherine walked forward, her steps deliberate and measured, her face a mask of calm professionalism. She gave a small bow, showing respect, but not submission. There was no need for submission here. She wasn't one to bow to anyone, not even a king. The king's voice broke the silence. "So Earth sends a female to beg for peace," he said, his tone dripping with mockery. "How appropriate." Catherine's lips curled into a faint polite smile, and she spoke with quiet confidence. The Terran Coalition sends its most qualified representative, Your Majesty. Gender is irrelevant to the task at hand. King Zardith's eyes flashed red at her words, his 6 fingers tapping faster on the armrest of his throne as he leaned forward, the weight of his disdain for her apparent. Catherine remained unfazed, her gaze unwavering. His mocking tone didn't rattle her. Nothing ever did. She had dealt with worse than alien kings and their petty arrogance. The king's ego was as fragile as his empire, and Catherine knew exactly how to exploit it. One of his advisors, a tall alien with 4 arms, stepped forward from beside the throne. His green eyes never left Catherine's face, his expression unreadable, but there was something in his gaze that was different. Something that suggested he saw beyond the diplomat and into the very essence of Catherine herself. "I am Grand Vizier Voltar," the 4-armed alien said, his voice as smooth as glass, though it held a certain wariness. "The king's most trusted advisor." Catherine nodded slightly, offering him the same polite smile she had shown the king. It was a smile that conveyed respect, but not subservience. She had learned long ago how to navigate such encounters. "A pleasure, Grand Vizier," she said, her voice calm but carrying an edge that even Zardith could sense. Voltar's eyes narrowed ever so slightly as he studied her, his green gaze piercing and intense. "There is something unusual about you, Earth Diplomat," he said, his voice quieter now, almost as if he were speaking to himself. His eyes seemed to look through her, not at her, as if he were searching for something buried deep within her being. For a moment, Catherine felt a flicker of something old and ancient stir inside her, a reminder that no matter how well she hid it, her true nature was always there, waiting beneath the surface. But she kept her face neutral, her mask intact. "I assure you, Grand Vizier," Catherine replied smoothly, "I am quite ordinary by Earth standards." The words sounded almost too calm, too measured, but there was a flicker of something primal, that danced behind her eyes for just a moment. Voltar noticed, his gaze shifting ever so slightly, but he didn't speak further. Instead, he stepped back, his eyes filled with doubt. King Zardith's laughter echoed through the chamber, deep and mocking. "My advisor is suspicious of all humans," he said, waving a hand dismissively. "You will be shown to your quarters. We begin negotiations tomorrow. Rest well, Earth Diplomat." Catherine's smile never wavered. "I will," she said, her voice betraying none of the underlying power she knew was still lurking beneath her polite demeanor. "Thank you, Your Majesty." As the royal guards escorted her out of the throne room, Lieutenant Rodriguez leaned close to Catherine, her voice low but filled with unease. "He's planning something. I can feel it," Rodriguez said, her hand instinctively resting on her sidearm. Catherine glanced at the lieutenant, her expression unreadable. "Yes," she replied quietly, her voice cool and controlled. "He is, but so am I, Lieutenant. So am I." The journey to Catherine's quarters was brief, but she felt the eyes of the Drarian guards on her every step of the way. The palace seemed to stretch endlessly, with winding corridors and grand halls that seemed to shift in the dim light. Strange murals and carvings adorned the walls, depicting scenes of a history that Catherine couldn't even begin to fathom. As they passed, she couldn't help but wonder how much of it was real, and how much of it was the result of the Drarians' twisted sense of power. When they finally reached her quarters, Catherine's thoughts turned inward. She had faced kings and conquerors before, beings who believed they were untouchable, rulers who thought their power would last forever. But in the end, all of them fell. Empires crumbled, and their rulers were forgotten. This one would be no different. Inside her quarters, Catherine moved with quiet precision, her mind already working through the steps of her plan. She would play the diplomat for now, of course. The king believed she was nothing more than a representative, a human negotiating for peace on behalf of her world. But she was more than that. Much more. Catherine walked to the far side of the room, where a small wooden box sat on a shelf. She had placed it there earlier in the day, out of sight and out of mind. But now, as the doors slid closed behind her, she retrieved it, placing it on the table before her. The box was old, the wood worn smooth by centuries of use, and inside it lay the tools she would need. The ritual objects, the ones that had carried her through countless lives. Bones, herbs, dolls, feathers. Each item had a purpose, a role to play in the weaving of magic that had been her heritage for as long as she could remember. Her hands moved with practiced ease, selecting the pieces she needed. The chicken feather was the first to go into her pocket, followed by a few dried herbs, carefully wrapped in cloth. She didn't need much, only enough to call the power she needed. Catherine stood still for a moment, her fingers brushing over the objects as if communing with them. She whispered an ancient phrase, one that felt as though it had been etched into her soul over millennia. The words were a promise to herself, a promise to the world. The air in the room shifted, and Catherine felt the familiar warmth begin to seep into her bones. She could feel the ancient power stir beneath the surface of the planet, feel the energy that had been buried beneath the layers of technology and civilization. There was magic here, old magic, and she had always known it. As she opened the window, a crow landed on the sill with a soft caw, its wings unfolding silently. Catherine spoke to it in a language older than time itself, the words flowing effortlessly from her lips. "Tell the sisters I go to the stars again," she said, her voice thick with ancient power. "If I do not return, the forest must be moved." The crow gave a single, sharp caw before taking flight, disappearing into the vastness of the alien world. Catherine watched it go, her thoughts moving at lightning speed. The Drarian king was dangerous, but he didn't know the depths of the power he was provoking. "I've dealt with kings before," she murmured to herself, her reflection catching her gaze in the mirror across the room. For a brief moment, the reflection shifted. She saw not a diplomat, but an old woman with wild white hair and eyes that glowed with the knowledge of millennia. "King Zardith," Catherine said, her voice sharp, her eyes narrowing. "Another king who thinks he knows what power is." The ship was ready to depart the next morning, its sleek hull gleaming in the rising light of the alien sun. Catherine met Captain Wells and Lieutenant Rodriguez at the entrance ramp, her face composed, the mask of diplomacy back in place. The men had already taken their places aboard, the air of the mission settling around them like a thick fog. But Catherine knew that the real mission, her mission, had only just begun. "Let's hope our time on this world is short," she said, her words light but heavy with meaning. "We need to move quickly." The U.S. horizon ascended from the surface of Tracker Prime, leaving the glowing cities and the pulsating energy of the Drarian Empire behind. Catherine sat in the observation deck, gazing out at the stars as the ship moved through the void, the familiar hum of the engines a comfort. Captain Wells and Lieutenant Rodriguez sat in silence behind her, each lost in their own thoughts, still processing everything that had transpired. But Catherine wasn't thinking about the Empire, or the power the Drarians had at their disposal. Her mind was already focused on the future, on the treaty, on what lay ahead, and what the cost of peace might ultimately be. Her role in this was finished. For now. "I think we've made history," Wells said after a long pause, his voice still filled with disbelief. Catherine didn't respond immediately. The ship's artificial gravity hummed gently beneath her feet, a quiet reminder of how far she had come from Earth. The journey had been more than just a diplomatic mission. It had been a reminder of the fragility of power, of the fleeting nature of empires, no matter how vast they seemed. "Yes," she finally said, her voice calm but heavy with experience. "But history is always written by the victors, and sometimes those victors don't even know what they've done until it's too late." She glanced over at Lieutenant Rodriguez, who was still staring at the view outside. The young officer had come to Earth as a soldier, as part of the security detail. But now, after everything they had witnessed, it was clear that Rodriguez was seeing Earth and the universe through different eyes. It was the kind of change Catherine had seen in countless others, though few had truly understood it. Rodriguez turned her head, sensing Catherine's gaze. "Do you think the Drarians will keep their word?" she asked, her voice filled with uncertainty. Catherine's smile was faint, almost imperceptible. "Their word means nothing, but a treaty signed in blood is more than a promise. It's a binding force, one that can't be easily broken, not without consequence. They will remember it, even if they never truly respect it." "But what if they try again?" Wells asked, his tone laced with the same cautious optimism that had first brought him to Earth. "The king. They were prepared to kill you, to destroy us. What happens if they don't honor the peace?" Catherine's eyes softened, but the ancient power within them still burned with quiet intensity. "If they come for Earth again," she said slowly, "they will find that humanity is not as helpless as they think. I have seen empires fall. I have seen the end of worlds. The Drarians will learn that they cannot simply bully their way through the stars, not while there are powers older than their empire still watching over us." The silence that followed was heavy with the weight of Catherine's words. Wells and Rodriguez exchanged a glance, neither of them entirely certain whether they believed her. But Catherine wasn't concerned with their belief. She knew the truth of it. And if they needed to learn that truth the hard way, she would be there, as she always had been, when the moment came. They passed through the jump gate into familiar space, the soft pull of Earth's gravity guiding them back home. It was strange how much time had passed, how many lifetimes, how many kingdoms, how many lives had been lost or changed since she had walked the forests of Earth as a child. Now, the planet was poised on the edge of a new chapter, one in which it was no longer isolated, no longer alone. The Drarians would remember this peace treaty, but it would be the legends of Earth's old magic that would truly define the future. As the ship made its final approach toward Earth, Catherine stood, her fingers brushing the smooth surface of the observation window. She had done her part. She had secured the peace. But there was something more. Something that had always been a part of her, deep within her bones, that whispered to her now. She wasn't finished yet. Captain Wells and Lieutenant Rodriguez stood beside her as the planet loomed ever closer, its familiar blue-green surface a sharp contrast to the vast expanse of space. The ship began to slow as they neared their destination, Earth's gravity pulling them toward it. "Once we land, the negotiations will be official," Wells said, his voice practical. "Then you'll be free to go. Return to your other work, I suppose." Catherine turned to him, a small smile playing at the corners of her lips. "There is no other work, Captain. It's all the same." Rodriguez looked at her, still clearly unsure of everything that had happened. "So what now? Do we just wait for the peace to hold? Or do we prepare for the next fight?" Catherine's smile widened just a little. "We wait, Lieutenant. But in the meantime, there are many ways to watch, many ways to guide the course of history. We do not always act openly. Sometimes the best moves are the ones we make in silence." As the ship entered Earth's atmosphere, Catherine stood tall, the weight of her years and knowledge settling around her like an invisible cloak. She had done what was needed. She had saved Earth from one of the most dangerous empires in the galaxy. But the universe was vast, and this was only one small chapter in a much larger story. Once the ship landed, General Boyd was waiting for her on the tarmac. His stern face softened only slightly by the relief of her safe return. As Catherine stepped off the ship, Wells and Rodriguez at her side, he greeted her with a nod of respect. "You did it, Catherine," Boyd said. "You really did it." Catherine's gaze flickered over him for a moment, and she almost laughed. He had no idea. He thought the negotiation was the hardest part. The treaty would be signed, and Earth would be safe, for now. But Catherine knew better. She had been watching, waiting, for so much longer than he could ever understand. "Yes, General," she said quietly, a note of finality in her voice. "But it's never truly over. There are always more to come." Later, when she was alone in her office, Catherine set down the wooden box that contained her old, ancient tools. It had been a long journey, but the world outside her office window seemed so very small compared to the vastness of the universe. She opened the box and traced the edge of the chicken feather gently, her thoughts lingering on what was to come. The treaty would hold, for now. But the world had just taken its first step into a much larger universe. And in that universe, Earth would no longer be a defenseless speck. Not while Catherine, Baba Yaga, was watching over it. She stood by the window, looking out at the stars, a quiet smile forming on her lips. In the shadows and forests of the old world, there were powers still watching, waiting. Humanity had no idea what had been set into motion, and Catherine wouldn't let them forget it. And so, the next chapter began.